Friends and running fans, this is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we do have one of those fastest runners, thanks to a great conversation with Conner Mantz, who's America's fastest recent marathon runner and one of the favorites to make the U.S. Olympic team at the marathon trials on February 3rd in Orlando.
Conner ran 2:07:47 in Chicago a couple of months ago, and in his last 2 years at BYU, he won the super competitive NCAA Cross Country Championships both years. But before talking with him, we want to discuss some of the biggest recent news stories in the running world. Amby, what have you been looking at these days?
Well, I'm really attracted to age group running at both ends of the spectrum, George. So things did capture my attention this weekend. Of course, a lot of people are talking about the Nike Cross Country Nationals, where Addie Ritzenhein, the daughter of Dathan Ritzenhein, and his wife, Kaylin Todebush, who was also an elite performer in her high school and college years, Addie Ritzenhein won the Nike Cross Country Nationals as a sophomore. So that was a sensational performance. But interesting was a runner not too far behind her, an eighth grader named Gianna Romer, finished sixth place overall as an eighth grader. And in fact, just 2 weeks earlier, she had beaten Addie Ritzenhein in a regional Nike race. And when we go up to the marathon, the unbelievable Kenenisa Bekele, who's had a couple of bad years recently, really pulled one out at the Valencia Marathon, where at the age of 41, he ran a 2:04:19, which is a world masters record by more than 2 minutes for his age group. And he didn't even do it in Nike, Saucony, Asics, or anybody else's super shoes. He was wearing Chinese shoes since he's no longer under contract to Nike. And I guess the Chinese have figured out how to make fast shoes, too.
Well, 2:04 for a Masters runner, Amby, that sounds to me pretty much kind of like two hours flat, for an open professional runner. It's just mind-boggling, to say the least. And Valencia was extraordinary. 39 runners under 2 hours and 10 minutes. I mean, we've never seen the likes of that in any single marathon ever, I'm sure. And the winner, Sisay Lemma from Ethiopia, we're beginning to kind of take these things for granted and say, ho hum, he only ran 2:01:48. But it was just extraordinary. And what they're doing in Valencia, the race director, Paco Barea, is an old friend of mine, and he puts on, an incredible marathon, an incredible half marathon, as you know. And I think now when people talk about going for world records and really fast times, they always talk Berlin, Chicago. And I think Valencia is now in the same conversation for sure. It's a spectacular event, and obviously he brings in big names.
Well, I've always known that I wanted to go to Valencia, Spain to visit it because it's a historic and wonderful city from everything I've read and learned. But the way it has come on in running in really just the last 3 or 4 years, it seems to me, it's got the city environment, it's got sponsorship groups that know how to put on an event, and it's got some big money people in Valencia backing that event for the community good. And it seems absolutely as fast a marathon as you can run anywhere these days.
Yeah, well, 39 guys under 2:10, and, a whole host of them, of course, were Kenyans and Ethiopians, as we've come to expect. And I read a recent column by Tony Revis, our pal who really follows the sport. And this year, he said there have been 142 Kenyan performances below 210, 97 Ethiopian performances below that number, and 8 U.S. performances. So that difference between what the East Africans and the rest of the world are doing in marathons, we see it week in and week out, but boy, those numbers just don't lie.
And by the way, the female numbers for fast runners, I don't know the country breakdown, but at Valencia, there were 45 women under 2.5 hours. Under 2:30, 45 women. That's got to be a record for one race, even against London and some of the other really deep marathon fields.
So, Amby, let's talk about another record of sorts, the Manchester race. You probably aren't dying to tell us, but I think we've got to tell our listeners that you ran it, and it was your 61st consecutive Manchester road race. My gosh, how many people have a streak? I mean, do you have any idea in any race of 61 consecutive? That's quite something.
Yeah, since I have those 61 at Manchester, thank you, George. I've also become the unofficial statistician and historian for road race streaks. Nobody else wants to be looking into that kind of stuff. I'll give you a couple of other points of reference. There's a fellow in Philadelphia who's got 63 or 64 in a row in his race, although he suffered a tragic accident decorating a Christmas tree a decade or so ago. He fell from the tree, and he's been a paraplegic ever since. Last 10 years, he's been pushed by friends and family in a wheelchair around the course. That's not exactly the same as the running I've done, but boy, is it a great story of a guy who got knocked down hard and came back strong.
Wow. And
the hero for all of us is a guy named Jack Kirk, the Dipsy Demon. He ran 73. He ran all Dipsies in a row for 73 years.
You're kidding.
The problem being that Dipsy was interrupted 6 times by world wars and recessions and little matters like that. So the race wasn't actually held every year, and therefore he didn't run it every year. But if you assume that he would have run in those missing years, his streak would be 73 on a really treacherous course at Dipsy. I ran it once, and I have not wanted to go back there again. So Jack Kirk is the hero to all streakers, but there are quite a few of us out there trying to keep it going, including at Manchester, where 2 women ran it for the 51st year in a row this year, which is a women's world record for road race streaks.
Wow. Amby, Lauren Fleshman's book has gotten a real tribute. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? You and I both read it and were impressed with it.
Yeah, Lauren's book, which is called Good for a Girl, became better than that. It became best ever for a girl sports writer. It just won the William Hill Sports Book of the Year award in England with a $38,000 prize attached to it.
Nice.
It's a historic award. It's been going on for 30-some years in England, I think. And it's really the first running book to win this Sports Book of the Year. And it's the first book by a female author about a female subject, in this case, herself and the world that Lauren lived in for so long, to win. I will add one of my other favorites, Lauren Hillenbrand, obviously a great female sports writer, wrote about Seabiscuit, but he was a dude, so it's not quite the same as Lauren. And her observations about women's running, which are so important and will be read by parents and teachers and coaches for decades to come because of some of the sharp criticisms that she draws, justifiably, of course, about male domination in the sport at too many levels, and also about attempts to manipulate female body composition by certain managers and coaches, thinking that that's the path to success, when it is too often the path to tragedy.
Amby, speaking of tragedy, there's been a sad and shocking loss in the running community in this last week, and that is our friend Mike Finelli. And a few thoughts about Mike. We're going to miss him.
Well, we all knew Mike personally and beyond that on Facebook and other social media for his tremendous enjoyment of the sport. He went to every big meet he could. For his own competitive zeal, he was out there competing hard his entire life. And for his historical interest particularly, he would post photos on Facebook that hundreds of thousands of us would see from, I don't know, the 1950s in some cases, and the 60s and 70s and 80s, moments that we had forgotten but were all too happy to see and to share again through Mike's viewpoint. And, I knew Mike. I can't say I knew him very well, but I do feel the loss deeply because he so much shared what people like you and I feel deep at the core.
And he called it a garage, but it was a veritable museum where he had all this great running data and paraphernalia from, even into the 1800s.
And apparently he knew that he was quite sick, more so than he let on to all of us. We didn't know, and that's why we were so shocked from his passing from brain cancer. But he did transfer a lot of his materials, all of his materials, to another great sports and running historian. So that material, thank goodness, will be saved, and it will be forever a testimonial to Mike's passion for the sport of running or athletics. And that's the biggest recent running news as we see it here at the podcast, Running, State of the Sport. This podcast, Running, State of the Sport, is brought to you by marathonhandbook.com and runlongrunhealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free, runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners.
Turn to our guests this week, Conner Mantz. Conner recently ran a 2:07:47 in the Chicago Marathon, which makes him one of the top contenders in the upcoming U.S. Olympic Marathon trials on February 3rd. Conner, welcome to the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
Conner, this is George, and welcome. And why don't you start off by filling us in just kind of quickly with a little basic biography, give us your age, and how did you grow up and where, and a little bit about your family situation now. Just give us a little of that for our listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, George and Amby. I'm Conner Mantz. I grew up in Smithfield, Utah. I'm 26 years old. Smithfield is in northern Utah. Most people probably don't know where, even people from Utah don't know where it is. So, but it's near the Idaho border. I'm married to my lovely wife, Kylie. Got married just last year, and I'm living in Provo, Utah right now. It's where I went to school and ran at BYU.
So Conner, one question George and I talked about a minute ago, we didn't preview you on. I happen to know that last year when, at Thanksgiving time, you traveled to Manchester, Connecticut for the Manchester Road Race, which you won, and you set a course record, but it was also your honeymoon. How the heck did you pull that off?
It it was kind of funny because originally me and my wife, well, when we were engaged, we were talking about, trying to find a time for a honeymoon, and we just said, oh, Thanksgiving time. And when I was like, oh, there's a race, like, would you not be too mad at me if we went and did that for part of our honeymoon? And then we went to New York after. That way we can, I don't know, we can use it as kind of hit two birds with one stone. And my wife was gracious enough to like that idea, or to be okay with it and nod her head and say, sure, if that's what you want. So I think more of it was just the amazing support from my wife.
Well, you were also smart enough. You were smart enough to win that race, which presumably had a nice prize purse with it. So at least you could take her out for a dinner or two or a show or two in New York.
Absolutely. I took her out to a show. So I think it worked out in the end.
So, Conner, winning Manchester, that begins a streak for you. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you win 60 more in a row, you'll be up to where Amby is currently in terms, not win, but consecutive Manchester races. Quite a streak that he's put together there, as you may know. Let me turn to the mile. Obviously, when we're talking to you, it's about the Olympic trials and the marathon, but you've got quick speed and you've run some fast miles, equivalent, at least in the 1500, of a 3:55. How do you feel your leg speed, your mile speed, 3:37 to 1500, plays into the success you've had recently in the marathon?
So I think, having some good mile speed is, I don't know if it's necessary. It's definitely not necessary to be a good marathoner. But I do think it helps to, sorry, I'm trying to collect my thoughts here, but I think it helps to, I don't know, kind of make it so it's like, okay, like 4:50 pace doesn't feel hard at all because, I can run 3:55 pace. And so it's kind of like a little more confidence building than anything. But I think I enjoy those shorter distances that I'm not focused on. And so that's why I like to run the 1500 so much. Is it just is like, it's just fun to jump in something that is just different.
Well, fun is always a good reason for running a race. And of course, these days, the marathon is a speed event to some degree, and the races are often won by 1, 2, 3 seconds with a kick at the end. So it's got to be a good tool to have. Let's move up to some marathon talk now, though. You had 2 marathons you've run this year in 2023, I believe, at Boston and Chicago. At Boston, you ran 2:10.25. You were third American, passed a little bit late in the race by Scott Fauble and Matt McDonald. I'm not sure that was your perfect dream scenario, but tell us about Boston. What was good? What wasn't so good? What did you learn?
So Boston, there's a lot there, so it might take me a minute to unpack everything. I went into that race, and I knew I was very fit. My workouts had gone pretty well. Not like nothing was perfect with that build, but everything had been like, I'd been healthy, I'd been hitting mileage, I'd been hitting workouts, and I'd been feeling pretty good. And I remember 2 or 3 days before, I was like, I got into Boston and was like, wow, I feel incredible. I think I'm going to do something very special. And then like the day before, maybe 2 days before, I ran into Mebka Flesgy, and he just gave me some advice. He's like, hey, like, word of the wise, don't try and go out too hard. So, and my coach kind of said the same thing. So what do I do? I go out that first 5K, faster than world record pace, because that's what everybody else in that pack was doing. So definitely didn't listen to the advice of, people who'd won the race and my coach before. But then, the build was so good that I thought I was fine. I could tell I went out a little quick, but I was like, there was a few miles where I was like, okay, I'm going to slow down and try to run, 450s again. And then the pack would slow down. And so during that race, I felt really good for the first 12 miles. Actually, everything felt really chill. Although I drank a little bit too much of my fluids, so I stopped taking fluids for a bit. But my legs felt good. My body was moving good. Around 15 or around halfway, the rain started pouring on us though, and so I got really cold and wet. But you're in a marathon; everybody's cold and wet. You just deal with the elements. Around 15 miles, we ran a really slow mile for what we had been running in our previous miles, and I think we were like around 5 flat, and I was thinking during this, after 15, I was like, you know what, like, I feel amazing. I might be able to win this. And then within 400 meters, Evans Chibet took the lead and dropped. I think their mile was around 4:23 or so. I ran 4:33 trying to hold back, but it was still too much for me. And Zuhair Talbi and myself worked together for the next few miles, but because I had gone out too hard earlier on, it kind of, and I didn't have anybody to pace off of. I just started to fade a ton once Zuhair kind of powered away from me. And then eventually I caught up to Kipchoge. I passed him at mile 23. Maybe 200 meters later, he passed me back, and then I was kind of just running behind him for a mile, and then I started to black out. And we've just kind of attributed that to missing my bottles and not taking the fluids late in the race that I needed, going out too hard, and then I just because of those two things, my body wasn't heating itself properly, and I got really cold. And then after the race, I went into I had some hypothermia going on, and so what didn't go well is I went out too hard. I didn't take my bottles, and I guess it was just being like too confident. But what went well was I fought to the end, even though my last mile was over 6 minutes, and I still averaged a sub 5 pace. That's how fast I went out. But it was just a good learning race of, okay, I need to respect the distance.
Okay, well, your next race was in Chicago this fall, and that was quite a different story because, at least on paper, it looks pretty darn good. I'm sure you hoped for a few seconds faster, but you did run 2:07:47. How about that race? What was good about that one? What did you learn, and can you run faster?
Yeah, that one had a lot better of a result. The build was pretty similar. Maybe a little bit better, but not like anything, crazy better. You can't. I mean, a few seconds here and there in a few key workouts. But as I went into that race, the goal was, play it pretty conservative to make sure that, even if I went out and tried to run pretty quick, I didn't want to have to blow up to 2:10 again. I wanted to, if I blew up, I'd blow up to 2:08. And so we went out actually too conservative. The first 5K, we Coach Eyestone had the goal to run 3 flat per kilometer, and because it's so flat, you can pretty much do that in Chicago. Like, just set one pace for the whole way. However, about, I don't know, our first 5K, some of the miles were off. Or our first few miles, we were just slow. And so I went through 15:24 and then spent the next, 15, 20K making up that 24-second differential. And then I got on pace, and I was hoping to run, 2:06:40, maybe 2:06:30, and I was feeling pretty good. However, when I hit about, 37K, the legs just weren't moving as good, so I started to slow quite a bit. And so I slowed to 2:07:47, but it was still I had, a minute or so in the bank under 208. So even when I died, I could salvage a sub 208. And that was fine. It was just, my goal was break 207, but B goal was to break 208. So
it's good to have an A goal and a B goal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our listeners should know you were an NCAA Cross Country champion at BYU in both 2020 and 2021. But then it was a pretty fast jump to elite road running level. And sort of tell us about that transition from college to becoming a pro runner.
Yeah. I was very, very fortunate because I stayed with my college coach. I actually was still in college. I was finishing my degree while I was in my first 4 months first 5 months as a professional. So I tried to keep things pretty similar. My coach stayed the same. One of my training partners is Jared Ward, and he kind of mentored me. And I'd been training with Jared, or at least doing some workouts with him occasionally when it was convenient for him to jump in our workouts as college athletes. I'd been doing these runs with him since my freshman year at BYU. Even before that, he'd been jumping in workouts with the college guys. And so it was really easy to jump in and start doing his workouts with him because it was what I'd done in college. It was just so similar. I trained with him a little bit heading into the 2020 Olympic trials, and I got injured. I was supposed to run the 2020 Olympic trials in the marathon, but I was injured before I was going to qualify at a half marathon beforehand. And so I'd done marathon workouts with him for a while, and then I did them also when I was in college. I think a week before I ran 3:37 for the first time, I ran an 8-mile marathon workout with Jared. So it's kind of like I was jumping around in my college days. And so it was nice. The transition wasn't too hard for me because I had so much already going on that was preparing me for it.
So there's a lot to be said for having Jared as a Olympic marathoner himself as a training partner, and you referred to your coach. Of course, we're talking about Ed Eyestone, who was another Olympic marathoner and an old colleague of Amby's and mine back at Runner's World, where we all worked together. And tell us a little about Ed's training philosophy as a coach.
So Ed's probably one of the more hands-off coaches. He very much lets you kind of do not do your own thing, I would say, but he gives the athlete a lot of liberty. And I think that's important for the college runners because when they finish running, they have a lot of, they understand what it's like to have freedom. So Coach Eyestone, as a coach, will give you liberty. He'll tell you all the things you should do, but he's never going to really follow up on them. I guess he will, but it's very occasional. He's not going to be like, okay, tell me everything about the workout, your rest, your work, your times. Tell me what your mileage was. For a lot of that, he'll follow up, but it's, he kind of gives you the correct principles, and then if you race well, he knows you followed it. And I just think he's such an experienced coach. I mean, he had so much experience as an athlete and coaching athletes that, in a way, he knows what he's doing. He's willing to listen to athletes. He's willing to work with athletes, but he's also not going to be mad if they're not doing what he asks.
That's interesting the way you've described Ed's coaching, and I gather you like having that amount of liberty yourself, but there must be an underlying philosophy there. Can you tell us what that is? I mean, do more, do less, do half your training as cross training. What's the basic approach?
I mean, it's definitely, we do more mileage than I think a lot of people do, especially in college. I think as long as far as like the professionals go, I think everybody figures out, oh yeah, you need to do a lot of mileage to be good. But I think, he keeps his workouts pretty intense as well. And I think his attitude is do as much mileage as you can, where you're able to have the best workouts possible. So like you can do, if you can do 100 miles a week and your workouts don't suffer, then keep that up and you stay healthy, then keep that up. But if you hit 110 and your workouts start to suffer or you're getting hurt, he'll cut you back. So I think he's very big on, pushing your limits and pushing your boundaries as time goes on.
What are your boundaries? What kind of mileage will you be averaging in the build up to the trials?
That's a good question. We've talked about it briefly. The high weeks will probably be about 120. I hit 120 last week, but I think we're gonna try and average closer to 110, just because 120 is pretty close to my boundary for injury. So I think we're gonna try and just, I don't know. Coach also has a quote or something. Something he told me before the Olympic trials in 2020 was, when you're going toward the Olympic trials, half those people are already hurt before the gun goes off. Like half the people that are qualified or are looking to make the team are already hurt. So I think during this build, 110 will probably be closer to what I try and average or hit for some of my high weeks instead of the 115, 120s that I hit for Chicago.
So you told us earlier that you like the mile. It's a fun event for you. Presumably you also find something interesting or challenging about running the marathon and trying to improve there. What do you like about going for it in the marathon?
That's a great question. The marathon, I think, is something that's always intrigued me. Ever since I was young, it's kind of been like that's what I wanted to run. When I think I was 8 years old or 9 years old, my dad and brother ran a half marathon together, a half. My older brother was 11 or so, and I really looked up to him. I still look up to him. And I asked my dad, I said, when can I run a half marathon? Whether it was with him or not with him, I just wanted to do what my brother and dad did. And instead, so eventually when I was 12, my dad signed me up for a half marathon and pretty much just told me you have to train for it. Not that we knew anything about training. All we knew was, oh yeah, to run a half marathon, you got to run. So I ran 4 days a week, and I ran as hard as I could every time I ran because that's all I knew. And I know that's not a good attitude of training, but it was
it's what everybody does at the beginning.
Exactly. And so after my first half marathon, my next thought was, I want to do a marathon. So at 12 years of age, I was like, okay, can I do a marathon now? And my parents said, no. They had talked to somebody who said, running a marathon at 12 years of age will stunt your growth or something like that. And I don't know how true that is, but I'm happy I didn't run the marathon at 12 years old. It just wasn't the right thing for me. So it's always been in the back of my mind. And so I think the appeal of always wanting to be a marathoner, and then that's what I follow is the marathon. I've always tried to follow the marathon. And I think to me, it's the greatest event. As far as racing and running goes. And so that's what's kind of always been there. That's why I've always liked the marathon. That's where the appeal comes from is, that 12-year-old that wanted to finish a marathon.
So you wear Nikes. Let's talk about shoes, super shoes these days. I remember Jared was wearing Sauconys. I don't know, is that still his shoe and his sponsor?
That's still his sponsor.
And you run with Clayton Young, another really talented marathon runner, as a training partner. What is he running in?
He's with ASICS.
ASICS. So what do you think about? That's good. You got 3 different shoes and with people that you're running with. And what do you and they think, is the difference between these shoes these days?
That's one of the few things I mean, if I didn't think Nike would have the best shoes, I wouldn't have signed a deal with them. And so we really don't discuss and say, hey, this is the best shoe, because I think that can lead to arguments or bad feelings one way or the other. So I couldn't tell you about which one's the best shoe, if that's what you're asking. I could tell you my personal thoughts, but not what the group thinks.
Yeah, I just wondered how much you guys sort of share notes, because you're there. You are 3 of you wearing 3 different shoes.
Yeah, I think it's funny because it's like I remember talking to Nike, some people at Nike once, and they were going to send me some prototypes. And then I was like, oh yeah, I'm just living in Jared Ward's basement. And they were like, make sure he doesn't see these, because these are our prototypes.
I see.
And I was just like, Jared's not going to look at them. He doesn't care. He just wants whatever is going to be the best shoe for him to wear. And he's pretty loyal to his brand, but he's not going to look at anything else and try and steal any information.
Well, I'd say all 3 of you got pretty good shoes underfoot there. I'm interested in the group training dynamic, because we've talked now a lot about Jared, of course, who's been an Olympic marathoner, a great marathoner for a while. Clayton Young is coming on really strong now with his performance in Chicago. He wasn't that far behind you. How do you guys train together and build each other up instead of tearing each other down, which sometimes happens with training groups?
Yeah, I think Jared's attitude definitely helps us all out. So I think Jared is just trying to do whatever's best for everyone all the time. And I don't know how well you guys know Jared, but he's a very calming and peaceful guy, and just kind of a good leader. If Jared Ward ran for president, which I don't think he would ever do, he would be the one I would vote for. It doesn't matter who else in the world is running. But he has I think Jared just kind of keeps the group calm, that there's never any, competition. I do think between Clayton and I, we can get pretty competitive with one another. We were also college teammates, and when Clayton won the NCAA championship in the 10,000 meter back in 2019, there were a few of us that were, fighting for that title, and it was just kind of like, oh, dang, like, I wanted that too, But I think, we all just want what's best for everyone in the group. So, yeah, that's, I don't know how to best if I answered your question or not, Amby, but we really just want to run together and get the best out of ourselves. And part of that comes from training together and sharing the lead and workouts, and making sure we're doing our runs together, because there's so much benefit to training with, fast people.
Sounds really supportive. And Amby and I do know Jared, and I think we'd both agree with you. He's a really impressive guy, and I think you're really fortunate to have him. I would say you didn't use the word, but as a mentor, and
yes.
I can see the value. We know him, and I've always been really impressed with Jared, for sure.
So another question I'm interested in, I like the specific nitty-gritty stuff, as George knows. There's quite a debate going on now about super shoes, and it's not, do they make you faster, because everybody agrees on that. The question is, do you believe you should run in them in training most or all of the time, or should you kind of save them for race day? And you guys also have a great running biomechanist with your team, Ian Hunter. So I'm just curious what your philosophy is on training in the super shoes.
Yeah. I'm happy you brought Dr. Ian Hunter up because he is. I was just going to quote kind of what he said because we've talked about this a lot on our runs, and I mean, anytime we have a question like this, we go to ask what Doc, as we call him, but Dr. Ian Hunter, what he thinks, and the idea is you don't do all your training runs in them, but there is a benefit to doing workouts in specific shoes that you're going to race in. You want to be as used to that shoe because your body, the more you run, the more your body runs, it changes your form to be the most efficient for your body. At least that's what Dr. Hunter says, the research suggests. And you want to be as efficient as you can be in whatever shoes you're going to race in. So you should, so when you're running in these shoes, you want to be in whatever's the best shoe or you want to be getting used to these shoes. However, on the downside is there are certain parts of your body that don't get strengthened if you always wear the super shoe, thus making the super shoe less efficient for you because you get weaker in certain areas. And so the compromise, if that's what you could say, would be you would run in the super shoe in your workouts and maybe twice a week, and then the rest of the week run in different, more trainer like shoes. And so that's kind of what we do is, once or twice a week, you're allowed, or maybe 3 times, but not any more than that, you're allowed to put the super shoes on. I don't know if that made any sense. Yeah, I tried to explain it as best I could.
It not only makes sense, but it agrees with what I've read and talked to other running biomechanists about. It's kind of like finding a balance. Absolutely, you've got to wear them in specific training to prepare yourself for the big race day, but perhaps not all the time. My next question kind of goes down the same rabbit hole because it's not just the shoes these days. People are doing a lot of other interesting things at your level, and I'm sure you must hear about them, whether you practice them yourself or not. But I'm not worried. I'm wondering about these things. They're all totally legal, so there's no problem with that. What are your feelings and your actual practice when it comes to caffeine, the kind of fuels that you take during the race, sauna bathing to increase blood plasma for the marathon? Which of these kind of things do you actually do?
So I do some of them, and I wouldn't say I know very much about them. Of course, I don't do anything that's gray area or illegal. I've used caffeine in some of my races for the second half of the race. I take the Martin 320 drink mix during my marathons. So far, I found that that's the best thing for me. However, next thing was, I try to do the sauna. I've tried the sauna. I think, I'm not sure if it is heat acclimation or if it increases blood flow for recovery or what it exactly does, but I believe it helps out with recovery. And so I do it, and I don't know how much it's helped or how much it hasn't, but I'm running well, so I'll hit the sauna 2-3 times a week. I've tried sleeping in an altitude tent. My wife isn't a big fan. Actually, maybe I should rephrase that. My wife's almost a bigger fan of it than I am. But sometimes when I like to tell people I don't like it, I kind of put the blame on her.
Good.
She's in the room laughing at me, so not saying anything that she won't be fine with. But I've tried a bunch of stuff, and I don't know. You're always trying to get whatever edge you can that's, legal and healthy and safe. And so it's really kind of tough because some of that stuff I think works and some of it, I don't know if it works, but I'm like, I don't know if the sauna works, but I'm going to keep doing it because I hope, that I can get just a little bit better.
Please tell your wife that.
So we got the
Go
trials.
ahead, George.
I'm sorry, Amby, stepping on you. I was just going to talk about February 3rd and who Conner sees as his main competitors coming into the trials. Maybe name 3 people that you would say you view as the top contenders that you are looking at going into Orlando.
Ooh, I'll give you. Okay, my training partners, those 2, we'll take those ones out because I train with them.
Okay, Clayton and Jared, yeah.
Clayton and Jared, but I'd say the other 3 are Galen Rupp, the trials winner in 2016 and 2020. He's definitely made the team. He knows what it takes to make teams. He knows what it takes to win. I think, the experience and the lifetime mileage he has is definitely lifetime fitness is definitely a huge advantage. Zach Panning, he's kind of under the radar, but I think his great run at the World Championships this year, as well as his, I don't know, I've seen some of his workouts on Strava. He's definitely one of the guys to beat. He's kind of a silent, a silent dark horse, if that's a thing, but I think he's going to have a great run at Florida. And then the third would probably be Scott Fauble, just because he's run so well at Boston for so many years. He's been the most consistent runner, I'd say, of the past 4 years of American marathoners. But, that can, he didn't have a good run in Berlin, so you never know.
So I think everybody would agree with you on those 3 picks you mentioned, plus certain 3 guys who have been running for BYU for a long time. I want to ask you just a couple of quick things about February 3rd specifically. First, there's been all kinds of controversy about the start time, the possible warm weather, etc. How do you feel about those things, and what are your favorite conditions? And then on the day itself, you can't be any more nervous than you get on the morning of the Olympic marathon trials. What are you going to do to calm yourself on the morning of February 3rd?
Oh, those are some great questions. First, I think as far as the trials go, I do wish they would have put it in the morning. I do like the morning better than anything. Cool temperatures, everybody likes that, like 40, 50, 60 degrees. Maybe not 60, but yeah, in the 50s would be wonderful. But I also think I can do harsh conditions. I can run however the race ends up playing out. I do think they should have just put it in the morning versus putting it at noon and then putting it at 10 a.m. I think they should have just put it, like 6 or 7 a.m. So in the earlier morning. Just because, I don't want to get there and be like, okay, I've done all this heat training because it's going to be hot and I'm going to do all this stuff to prepare for a hot race. And then they're like, oh, it's going to be too hot. Our contingency is let's move it to the morning. I think having a contingency plan just kind of sounds a little, maybe ridiculous isn't the right word, but it just doesn't make sense to say, let's do this time unless things go wrong and then we'll change it. When it's like, well, wait, why don't you just choose a time that's more likely to work out for everyone? That's my thought, but I don't have much to say.
I should have noted that after batting things around a bit, it looks like they've moved the time from 12 noon to 10 a.m., which isn't a very big move, as you are kind of stating under your breath. So what are you going to do about nerves that morning and make sure you're confident and ready to go at the start?
I think I'm just going to try and be relaxed. I'll probably bring a book or something Sometimes, you get into such a routine that the nerves on race morning aren't really there. Or they are, but they're pretty small until you get to the start line. So I'll probably bring a book or two or something, something to relax. But I bet I'll be getting such a routine of I'll have to wake up, I'll have to eat my breakfast, I'll have to, get everything ready. I'll lay my jersey. I'll just be slow and precise about all the little things that I can do, and take my time with them all.
So, Conner, on this podcast, we give all of our guests 3 fairy godmother wishes, and you can use them for your running in general or for the Olympic trials or whatever. But we're not going to let you use one of the wishes to get more wishes. So, have to be 3 distinct wishes here.
Oh, man. And I'm assuming this is all running wishes.
No, you know what? You take it the way you want it. Life, running, the trials, anything that comes up on your screen.
I'll keep them running because peace and anti-war and that I feel like I'm not sure on which of those questions I could give off the top of my head. But as far as running wishes, number 1 would be stay healthy. If I could stay healthy through the rest of my career, I'd be very happy. Making the Olympic team would probably be another wish, and a third with running would be my training partners making the Olympic team. I think that would be. I guess I don't know. Would that be 2 wishes or 1?
That's all right. I can imagine 3. The 3 of you guys. It reminds me of an old Runner's World headline, Conner, from many years ago. I don't remember the full headline, but it was about the Stormin' Mormons back when it was Ed Eyestone, Henry Marsh, Doug Padilla. That would be quite something if the 3 of you were the team.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Conner, I think those were 3 great wishes, and we don't actually have a lot of power to control them. Maybe our fairy godmother does. But we can certainly say that we wish you the best on all 3 of those. It has been really terrific for us to have this time to spend with you. So much fun. We learned so much. Thank you for being here with us at the Running State of the Sport podcast. George, that was a great conversation we had with Conner Mantz. What did you find most interesting about his remarks?
Yeah, I love talking about that kind of elite marathon center that they've got out at Brigham Young these days under Coach Ed Eyestone. It's pretty darn impressive. You've got Conner, and he's training with Jared Ward, who's an Olympian and who's acted as a mentor, probably somewhat of a coach himself. And then his training partner, Clayton Young, who certainly has got to be part of the conversation to make this U.S. Olympic team.
Yeah, how do you beat a group that includes a coach who's a 2-time Olympic marathoner, a guy, Jared Ward, who's been to the Olympics and finished 6th, I think, in the Olympic marathon, and he's a statistician to boot, so he can figure out how to shave off seconds and microseconds here and there. And then you got the 2 young guys coming along at full tilt also. They've really got a great group. I enjoyed Conner's stories about watching his brother and his father run a half marathon when Conner was 8 and his brother was 11. And he got so psyched up by that. He said to his dad, "Dad, I want to run the marathon now." And fortunately, his father had the good sense to tell him to hold back for a while. And wait until the best years of marathoning, which are right now for Conner, and he's proving the wisdom of that path.
Yeah, and when we asked him about his wishes, I like the fact, I'm getting back to the BYU thing here again, but he said, he'd love for his teammates, Clayton Young and Jared Ward, to make the team along with himself. And Amby, they're all contenders. I mean, that's a long shot. You don't get three teammates making the Olympic team. It doesn't usually fall that way, but if that were to happen, it would be pretty extraordinary.
It would be amazing. I know a number of universities and even smaller schools, Division III schools, that are very proud of the fact that they've got 5, 6, 7, 8 people qualify for the Olympic marathon trials, and proud they should be. But these are not athletes who have much, if any, chance of making it to the Olympics, whereas BYU has got a solid threesome, and the odds are against them, as a statistician like Jared Ward knows, but he also knows that there's an opening. It's not 100% shutout, and all three of them are going to go for it. And that's going to be a very exciting part of the Olympic marathon trials in February. I like the fact, this is just a humorous aside. At one point I asked Conner, or you did, what about your running shoes? Because they're each sponsored, the three guys, by different running shoe companies, as those things often work out when you're a post-collegiate. It was like, how much do you guys talk about running shoes on the run? Because that's all anybody else talks about these days. And he said, none at all. It's just not a subject that comes up. We all feel that we're not allowed to. So we'll be following BYU and all the runners at the Olympic marathon trials very, very closely. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. And until then, in signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.